Hello everyone, this is Mr. Fu. Here I am to do a prediction for the 2022 5076 GCE level science paper. I will start with chemistry. I will do another video on physics later on. Now, before I look at the predictions for 2022, I would like to look at what was tested last year. Let's look at what was tested in paper 1 and then paper 2. In the chemistry paper, for paper 1, there were questions related to appropriate measuring apparatus for experiment. There was a question related to QA, where students need to know the reagents to test for cations and anions. KPT, how do the particles arrange themselves when energy was lost? Atomic structure, where students or candidates were required to state the symbol given the structure of an atom. Students were also tested on dot and cross diagram in the multiple choice paper, where they will need to choose the correct option that represented the compound. More calculations were tested in the multiple choice section with both the volume of gas and the concentration and volume of solution, and the use of mole ratio and stoichio. There were questions on energy changes where students need to show understanding on the difference between endothermic and exothermic so that they could choose the correct option. Rate of reaction, where students need to demonstrate knowledge on whether pressure will affect the rate of reaction given the equation. So pressure affect reaction involving gaseous reactants. As for temperature, it will affect all types of reactions. So other than the topics listed earlier, these are the remaining topics tested in the paper 1. There was a question related to redox on the effect of reducing agent. And students need to know the examples of oxidizing agent, which is acidified potassium manganate, as well as reducing agent, aqueous potassium iodide. Students need to show demonstration of knowledge of what indicator do and the applications on the colors of the solution when the indicator was added. Solubility of salts was also tested in this paper. In the question, they were given a list of soluble and insoluble salts. So they will need to choose the appropriate chemicals to prepare the insoluble salt in the precipitation reaction. Concepts in periodic table was tested where students need to compare between metal and non-metal in the same period. So do they have the same number of atomic number, or metal, non-metal have higher, lower atomic number, etc. Concepts in periodic table were heavily tested in this paper, where students also need to compare between elements in the same group, in particular group 7, and the products formed with sodium metal. And they were also tested on properties of non-metallic elements, as well as reactions of metals with cold water, steam, and acid, ranking the metals in order of reactivity. That question was a repeated question from previous years. There was a question on air where they need to understand that the metal reacts with oxygen, and oxygen contribute about 16% of air. And they will need to calculate to find out the volume of air that remains in the syringe. Lastly, organic chemistry was tested in the last 2 questions before we have another question on potassium manganate. Surprisingly, for paper 1, we did not see a lot of organic chem questions, unlike previous years. There were only 2 questions in the MCQ section. One was on the fractional distillation of petroleum, but they need to only remember the use of naphtha as a feedstock. Then another question is on the concept of alkenes. Are they saturated or unsaturated? What is their general formula, their combustion reaction, and if they do react with hydrogen in the presence of a nickel catalyst. All right. Now, so after we shared what was tested in the 2021 paper 1, I think it would be helpful to look at what was tested in paper 2. If you look at the pure chemistry syllabus, it is not exactly true that whatever tested in paper 2 will not be tested in paper 1. That is not true. Okay, so they could actually test similar concept, but of course in a different manner. Okay, you will understand it as I go through this, and this is replicated in physics. So it is not a good idea to think that, hey, this particular concept was tested in paper 2. So for paper 1, I can just ignore it. No, you cannot. They could actually repeat the concept in paper 1. Okay, so this is what I observe now. They have been trying to do that to prevent people from speculating. So let's look at what was tested in 2021 paper 2. So there were some questions on the types of oxides, which is challenging for many students. I hope they will be able to overcome it by remembering the examples of the types of oxides, like the examples of acidic oxides, basic oxides, amphoteric, and neutral oxides. What are they? Where are they arranged in the periodic table for the elements? And they need to understand what causes acid rain. And some questions on the blast furnace were tested, but in a different manner. They were not tested on writing down the equations, describing the process, but rather they were asked as a one-word answer. So they were given a choice of oxides, and they're supposed to choose the one that was involved in the extraction of iron in the blast furnace. So 2 particular concepts were tested: reducing agent in the blast furnace, as well as the chemical used to remove impurities. All right. Now, there was a small base or mini questions on periodic table, a type of mini question, mini data analysis lah. So they were given data on melting point and density, and it should be obvious to them that it will be difficult to predict the density because it is not the trend is not obvious. Okay, so you have the density increases down the group until potassium, where it doesn't increase, but it actually decreases before it increases back to rubidium. So that kind of question actually origin from the pure chem papers in other schools, not really in O-level, but it appeared in pure chem. So this data inference came out in combined chem. So what I'm trying to say here is that we will see more of such modified, adapted pure chemistry data analysis questions coming down to combined science. Now, so students need to observe the trends of melting point density. For melting point, it decreases down group 1. As for density, it increases in general, but there is a deviation between sodium and potassium. Now, students need to know the physical properties of metals, all right, and understand trends like why certain element is in certain period, why these two elements are in the same period based on similar number of occupied electron shell, for example. Why are they in the same group? Because they're the same number of valence electrons. Okay, just take note of that. And of course, a balance equation between group 1 metal, in this case, sodium with water. All right. The next question relates to the fermentation process to form ethanol from glucose. So students need to show understanding on the conditions and describe briefly how the process comes about. So they need to mention important points like the use of yeast at 37 degrees Celsius so that the enzyme yeast will not denature in the absence of oxygen, so that the alcohol form will not be oxidized to ethanoic acid, and making sure that there is an outlet to release the gas, to line water, to release carbon dioxide, to prevent accumulation of carbon dioxide in the conical flask in the production of ethanol, and how ethanol is later purified using fractional distillation, because the products of fermentation is still a mixture. So in order to purify ethanol, fractional distillation is carried out based on different boiling point of ethanol with, say, water. The drawing of the full structural formula or displayed formula of carboxylic acid was required. The concept of saturation was tested, like, is this compound a saturated alcohol? Why is it so? Explain using the examples given. And students were given a list of description of reactions, and they're required to state the type of reaction. So concepts like cracking, neutralization, exothermic, endothermic, precipitation, oxidation, and reduction were tested. See, exothermic, endothermic, it was repeated in paper 1. So this is one of the example I'm trying to say. But there are some concepts that are not tested in paper 2. For example, like, you don't see dot and cross diagram in paper 2. Oh, you do see, sorry, you do see later on. See, oh, sorry, I mean, they can repeat dot and cross diagram. For example, like, they may ask you to draw one organic compound like later on, but in the paper 1, they may test you with an inorganic compound example, something like that. Okay, then we have other questions like salt preparation. This is quite a heavy question with a total of 5 marks. So there are 3 stages. So students need to know the reason for each step because it was tested. You can't blindly memorize the answer. So you have to look at the question. For example, there's this question said that, okay, what is a physical change that occurs to water? So it was something not in the standard list of questions that students are familiar with, but they need to apply. So when the aqueous magnesium sulfate is left in air, the water evaporates. So there's a change of state from liquid to gas. All right. Now, students were also required to understand the concept of purity and know that pure substance has a fixed melting point and impure substance will melt over a range of temperature. So they need to show this understanding to score that point. There were some questions on kinetic particle theory. I see this heavily tested as well in the physics paper. It seems like both the chem and physics counterparts are setting kinetic particle theory. Yeah, very similar. So for chemistry, they were asking about how kinetic particle theory is used to explain the change in arrangement and motion of particles. So it's not enough just to state what is it, but you need to say before, during, and after. All right, like what was it before and what happened to cause it to change its arrangement and motion, maybe taking energy, blah, blah, blah. Other concepts include the reaction of carbonate with acid, precipitation, and test for gas, in particular ammonia and carbon dioxide. So maybe they will still test for gas this year on maybe hydrogen and oxygen. Okay, or other guesses like those in the syllabus. Mole calculation definitely tested. It's definitely tested like every year because it's an important skill in chemistry, and the concept of alloy as well as speed of reaction, where students need to know how to draw gas strings. And quite a number of speed of reaction questions in 2021, which is similar to the pure chem. As I mentioned, the pure chem combined N and O level have similarity. So there were some questions that are quite related in terms of their topics. So speed of reaction was heavily tested in the pure chem portion. So in the combined chem, it was quite significant in terms of the marks composition. So we have collision theory and rate of reaction, sketching of graph, more calculations again. And then we have an organic chemistry questions related to the test for alkenes using aqueous bromine, blah, 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 and the relation of unsaturation to CC double bonds. And yeah, this is a dot and cross diagram I mentioned, and quite a number of marks were given to the concept of polymers. So this was a bit surprising. So there were drawing, there were use and environmental issue, and they actually gave 2 marks for environmental issues. So students to know about the non-biodegradability. That is not enough. Also need to talk about when the polymer was disposed through burning, there was some toxic gases released. So something like that. So students need to be aware that every single concept that was in the syllabus will be tested. So don't neglect this. So the last question in paper 2, this was one of the 3 questions students need to choose. I think this one is quite easy, the last one actually, because the questions are well structured and the answers expected is not a lot. So I will actually advise students to choose question with less descriptive so that they will be able to capture the points. So if there's a long question involving 3 marks, there is a high chance that student may not be able to score the 3 marks. So if you are not particularly strong, right, don't try to choose questions that they are quite demanding in terms of the marks. So in case you forget the concepts or forget the important points, then you will lose the points. Okay, so the last question is on atomic structure and bonding. So students need to recall the relative charge and relative mass of the various subatomic particles correctly, calculate the number of neutrons, and how to describe the formation of ion from atom. Okay, so talk about, in this case, they give metal, potassium. So potassium is a metal, so it became an ion by losing how many valence electron? 1, right? Because it's group 1 to become an ion. And this ion will have 1 less electron than the atom, and the configuration changed from 2.8.8.1 to 2.8.8. So because the question demands students to write in terms of electronic configuration, so students need to write down the electronic configuration. And lastly, the physical properties of ionic compounds were tested. Now, so in general, these are the popular topics like metals, blast furnace, atomic structure, quite a lot, chemical bonding, organic chem, more focused on polymer, just like in the pure chem, fermentation, alkenes, speed of reaction, as I mentioned, salt preparation, quite a number of marks, but more to the reasons behind certain procedures, and reading the question very carefully to know what they want. Kinetic particle theory, yes, more calculations, periodic table trends, in particular group 1, not so much on group 7 actually. There are, but not so much. Only 1 question in multiple choice. Then we have my prediction for 2022. Chromatogram, just take note of that. Dot and cross diagram is on a smaller scale. More calculation, focus more on concentration of solutions. Acid and bases, not much. So yes, be careful of that. pH indicator, oxides, that could be an inference questions on titration curve. Periodic table, we look at group 7 noble gas metal. They miss out quite a lot this year for paper 2. So I'm predicting they will have rusting, corrosion, recycling, displacement, reduction reactions or properties of metal, pure metal versus alloy, reactions of metal with water, steam, acid. Just be careful of metals, okay? Redox, yes, they never ask a question about explain how is this a redox reaction, explain why it is oxidizing agent, why it is oxidation. So this standard question may come out this year. Energy changes, but not so much because it's a small topic like the combined science syllabus. Organic chem, in particular alkanes, it could be substitution, alcohol, and carboxylic acid, in particular the reactions of carboxylic acid with metals, with base and carbonates. As well as air, not so much on air. There's only one question on acid rain. So yeah, just take note of that. Only one question on acid rain as well as the percentage of oxygen. So there'll be some more environmental issues related to air and more inference types of questions modified from the pure chem syllabus. Okay, so that's about it. I hope you actually find it useful lah. All right, so I will proceed on to do another video. Hope you will like my channel and subscribe to my channel for more updated curriculum related things to physics, chemistry, or even biology. Thank you.